I usually start most of my conversations with my CEOs with talking about them and their businesses. Before we get to what's happening on Capitol Hill, I usually start by saying, well, how's your year looking? What's going on with the business? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about? And it's very often, where's our pricing, or what's going on with our distribution, or how are we sourcing raw materials? And you learn a lot just by listening. One of the things members tend to value is when I talk to one, and then I can say, here's what I'm hearing from the other members. Here's some intelligence about the industry that's not just related to what's happening on Capitol Hill. And they tend to both value that and then also trust that I understand them a little more.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with David Chavern, President and CEO of the Consumer Brands Association, or CBA. David, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Happy to talk to you about the trade association business.
Awesome. Well, tell us about CBA.
Sure. CBA we represent the makers of the great brands that people use every day. So if you think about everything in the grocery store, the drugstore, all those great brands, daily brands that support people's lives, we're the companies that make those brands. It's the General Mills, Nestle's, Procter & Gamble, Kraft Heinz. I don't want to go down the whole list because I'll leave somebody out. I'll leave out one of my favorite children. So let's just say it's all of the great brands in the grocery store and the drugstore.
David, are your members the large grocery manufacturers, or do they also include small companies?
Both. Definitely most of the larger companies and a good chunk of, say, the mid-sized companies. It's an interesting industry because even though it's a mature industry, as in people have been doing this for a long time, there are always new entrants and new and upcoming companies. And part of our strategy is to be an attractive place for them as well. So we try to have it across the board. We definitely have a high percentage of the larger makers of these products, but then a good chunk of the mid-size as well.
And is this industry growing?
Absolutely. First of all, there's new ideas and products all the time. It's an industry that is very immediately tied to the changing nature of the consumer. So it's a very quick moving industry. They're adapting all the time to changing consumer tastes and preferences. It's growing consistently, has grown consistently and well for, more than 100 years and is on a continued trajectory there.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you about how the industry is changing and how you're changing as a result. But before we do that, let's talk about your journey. So, David, how do you get to become president and CEO of a large trade association and a prominent one like CBA?
Mostly by accident. So I'm not sure that's great advice, but I was a lawyer for a number of years. I wanted to try something different. And I had the fortune of going to having a glass of wine with Tom Donahue at the Chamber. And he offered me a job on the spot, even though I'd never done trade association business at all. And I started a program at the Chamber built around capital market issues. And turned out I loved it. I liked the strategy of it, the communications, the working with members. And we built a great program. I then went on to be chief operating officer at the U.S. Chamber for a number of years. And Tom and I had a really good partnership. Subsequent to that, I did one of the most interesting things in every dimension that you could imagine. I ran the trade association for news publishers, the News Media Alliance.
Oh, I'm familiar with them.
Yeah. And then I made this switch over to the consumer brands, which has been tremendous. Great companies, great issues, and we've got a lot of growth. So I'm really happy about that.
David, you've worked in three very different trade associations. How do you make the mental shift between industries?
That's an interesting question. It's a lower bar than I think most people presume, in the sense that I have come into each of these spaces not knowing what the industries are about. And if you're intellectually curious and you're kind of diligent about it, and in particular, you listen very carefully to the people who run these companies, you can pretty quickly get pretty knowledgeable and conversant about the industries. I have always prided myself, and I continue to do that, of getting to a place, takes a little time, but getting to a place where my members view me as not exactly a peer, but somebody who is deeply understanding of their commercial drivers. Yes, I mostly work on public policy related issues, but I think you always have to come from a base of understanding their business at a core level. And you do get to this place with the CEOs of these companies where they kind of get that you understand what they worry about. Because for the most part, these CEOs do not wake up every day worrying about public policy stuff. They're worrying about operations stuff or pricing or customers or consumers or marketing. And if they get a sense that I at least understand the basics of that and that informs my public policy place, I tend to be much more effective both on the public policy and with the CEO. So I pride myself of digging in and learning the industries.
David, what does that look like to get to know the industry? Is it interviews? Is it travel? Is it visit? Is it reading? What does that look like?
Well, some things that are invaluable is seeing where people work, seeing what their place looks like, tells you a lot about how they think about their daily life, how they think about their operations. Going to factory floors. I love factory floors.
Ah,
Reading like crazy. Just read everything you can about the business, not just about the public policy part of it. And listen very, very carefully whenever you're talking to them. And I usually start most of my conversations with my CEOs with talking about them and their businesses. Before we get to what's happening on Capitol Hill, I usually start by saying, well, how's your year looking? What's going on with the business? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about?
right.
And it's very often, where's our pricing, or what's going on with our distribution, or how are we sourcing raw materials? And you learn a lot just by listening.
Yeah, and I bet if you have consistent conversations like that, certain themes start to come out, and then you realize, wow, distribution's an issue or workforce is an issue, as an example.
Oh, absolutely. And also, one of the things members tend to value is when I talk to one, and then I can say, here's what I'm hearing from the other members.
Ah,
Here's some intelligence about the industry that's not just related to what's happening on Capitol Hill. And they tend to both value that and then also trust that I understand them a little more.
David, you've got some really giant members, like, a Clorox, a General Mills, or a Coke. Is it the CEOs of these companies that are actually engaging within CBA, or is it people below them, or both?
Well, both. In terms of being on the board at CBA, you either have to be the CEO of the company or essentially head of North America for an international company, but senior business executives. They are on the board and they are involved in our work. I'm talking to them directly. They text me all the time. They are personally involved and knowledgeable about what we're doing. But to be successful in this business, you also have to get depth of engagement.
Right.
So certainly on the government affairs side, the regulatory function, we have a very active legal community that is connected through consumer brands. Getting that depth of organizational engagement both gives the members some sense of value. So every year when the dues bill comes in, they talk to their people. Hey, what about the CBA thing? And everyone's like, oh, I like their stuff. I like.
Ah, yes.
And so you're reducing churn, but also you're learning a lot. You're really serving the industry as opposed to serving some piece of it.
Well, let's turn to CBA and the things that you're doing to thrive. So let me ask you, what's your year looking like?
Yours looking great. I mean, we've got a bunch of great new members. Nestle, Diageo, Kimberly-Clark. We can give you a list of a bunch of members we've added this year that we're really excited about. Kraft Heinz is another one. So really good on the membership side. If you look at the layers of impact, our advocacy work has gone gangbusters. We've got issues where we're engaging with the government on a whole range of regulatory issues and public policy issues. We've got really good events. We do an event in the fall called the CPG Summit, which is really the premier event for senior executives in the consumer product space. We try to keep it intentionally a fairly small event. It is where you're getting the top 150 executives in the industry to connect with each other. We have that in the fall. We've got good membership growth, good impact, a lot of good member enthusiasm, and good events. So it's been a good year. We're very happy with our direction.
Well, it sounds like it's working, and you just shared a mouthful there. So let me dive into a few of these. So you've got this CPG, and CPG stands for consumer product goods, right?
Consumer product goods or consumer packaged goods. It's a Wall Street term.
So you've got this CPG summit coming up in the fall, and it sounds like it's a very high-level affair. Is it trade partners talking with each other? Is it education about the future? What is it, and what makes it successful?
It is sort of balanced in both those things, which is it's a place where the top 150 executives in the industry know they can connect with each other. And by the way, that just doesn't happen otherwise. There aren't other places where that happens. And secondly, we have really excellent programming with people from the industry talking about what the future looks like. And it's usually a combination of here's what's happening in the industry right now. We'll add in some politics, we'll add in some workforce, we'll add in some technology look aheads where our goal is after a couple of days, they're leaving smarter than they went in. And when you talk to executives of big companies, one of the things you get for the most part, they are intense learners. They always are absorbing. They want a new level of understanding about something. So we are trying to deliver that to them in this couple day period.
That's really interesting because essentially what you're doing is you're creating a safe space for all the business partners to come together where normally they just don't have those opportunities.
Exactly. And talk about complicated new things. Yeah, it could be AI. AI was a big topic last year. What is the new and emergent issues that they have to worry about with their businesses? These guys and women and are custodians of big, important enterprises that employ a lot of people, and they have to be very thoughtful about what's coming at them ahead.
Well, David, you say that the industry is changing pretty fast and companies are always coming up with new products and services, and they're reacting to what consumers are wanting. So what are some big trends in the industry and how are you adapting?
Big trends in the industry, probably one of the biggest is telling the story of the industry. I think it is not well understood that this is the biggest domestic manufacturing segment in the economy. We employ something in the order of 30 times more people than the U.S. steel industry, just roughly, by way of example. So we are a huge domestic manufacturer with huge economic impact and really positive impact for communities and consumers and employees. As part of that, by the way, we're about to come out with a new economic impact study that lays all that out almost on a state-by-state basis. So part of it is they need us to tell their story because it's not a well-understood story. It's often not well understood by people in the industry, so let alone policymakers. So telling their story and then taking on emerging issues that come up. We've been pretty vocal, for example, on all of these frames around greedflation, which I think is a really not helpful or even thoughtful idea. We're looking at regulatory issues around front of pack labeling. We're looking at continuing legal trends in the industry. So there's a lot of policy issues that the industry needs help with. And our goal is to always be a resource. As I say, we try to pick out the hardest things that our members are facing and run at those very hardest things. Always be trying to solve our members' biggest problems.
Tell us more about the economic impact study. How was the research conducted, and how is the research being disseminated?
We partnered with PwC and looked at the full range of operational impact for the consumer products industry, and both in every dimension: pure economic impact, employment, state by state employment, manufacturing versus other kinds of employment. We're just finishing up on that. And then we're going to do a big push, a big education campaign to educate everybody. Again, starting with our own members often, about just the massive presence of the industry in the economy. Just by way of example, there's a lot of discussion right now politically about US manufacturing. And it is not well understood or certainly appreciated that we're the biggest domestic manufacturing segment in the economy.
Right. Because we make pretzels in Pennsylvania. And
Yeah, we don't import the stuff for the most part. And it is often manufactured in rural, suburban, urban, every kind of dimension you can think of. We have manufacturing distribution facilities. So we employ a lot of people at good wage jobs.
David, what types of advocacy issues are important to the industry, and how do you bring the industry together when it's so diverse in terms of size, geography, products?
On the public policy side, I go back to right now, there's a range of regulatory issues at the FDA about front of pack labeling, where you get involved in dietary guidelines. There's things about chemical additives. A lot of the work actually is emerging in the states, where a number of states have become pretty activist. Another big area, for example, for us, I haven't mentioned, is the whole recycling idea. Our members want and need there to be effective recycling programs across the United States. And part of what we advocate in the states is for good, effective systems in states for recycling. Part of it is a regulatory thing around products. Some of it's just stuff that pops up in an election year, like greedflation. And a lot of it is state level things about, hey, can we have really great recycling systems so that we reduce our use of things like virgin plastic in the product packaging?
Oh my God, because these members are so large and they're manufacturers, it sounds like you get involved in everything.
We try to.
It's just on the advocacy side.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, because it's not because they're uniquely at risk or something. It's because they are such a major part of the economy and such a major part of people's lives. President Biden, in his State of the Union address, talked about Snickers bars. He said something like 10% less Snickers in your Snickers, even though I don't think Mars has reduced the size of the bars, by the way. I don't think that was accurate. But in a time when car insurance has gone up 25%, housing has gone way up, a whole range of things has gone up. He talked about a brand where the pricing, by the way, hadn't changed hardly at all. So why did he do that? He did that because he knows consumers are attached to these products, right? So these are companies that make up a big chunk of the economy. Consumers are very aware and attached to the products. And so because of that, there's a range of public policy and advocacy issues that you have to help them with. And we're happy to do it. And we take great pride in it.
David, across your career, you've been involved with many associations and many trade associations. How has the trade association business changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. A really good question. It's changed because Washington has changed. And what I mean by that is, historically, at least on the advocacy pillar, it was a bunch of shoe leather lobbying, right? You met with the committee staff and you walked the halls. And all of that is still there and still is important. But really, what has changed is the explosion of media, particularly digital media, and the fact that a lot of what happens on Capitol Hill comes from the outside in. I used to say the business used to be inside out, as in you walk the halls and had outside impact. And now it's outside in, meaning policymakers are tend to respond to messages that are coming at them from social media, from Twitter, from outside spaces, and are very immediately impacted by these outside forces. And if you want to have positive change, then you have to generate your own outside forces. So it's the communications part. A trade association is at core primarily a communications vehicle. You're telling the story of the industry and then using those stories to drive positive change. The event part of it, it's always been a big part of the business, remains a big part of the business. What you have to do is continually reinvest in thinking about how to make the event continually better, really current. And the trouble with the event business is it can go away really quick if you sit on your laurels. If you're just like, you're going to run it back again next year and you know everybody's going to show up because they've always showed up, you'll find that that ends in the demise of your events. You really just got to continually remake it every year. A thing I think has changed considerably.
David, I had a gentleman named Russ Webb from the Bay Area Apartment Association, and he said that he has a FOMO, a fear of missing out event strategy. His annual conference is never at the same time, never in the same location, and never with the same format.
Well, that has its own challenge.
It's a crazy formula. And when I share it with sometimes with clients, they gasp and I say, look, I'm just sharing. But in the case of this organization, it is absolutely working because to your point, he's always keeping his members guessing and they don't want to miss a single meeting.
Yeah. And there's a long list of events, industry conferences and stuff that have gone away. Right? We tend to always focus on the ones that are here, but
absolutely,
there's a long list of ones that have gone away because it doesn't take many misses to where people stop showing up. You know, they come and have a bad experience or a boring experience one year. They're then like 50% less likely the next year to come and 75% less likely 2 years from now, right? You can't afford to be two in a rut very long, and then they can just evaporate. They could just go away. So you kind of do have to at least psychologically reinvent it from scratch every year.
So what's a change you've made to your events that's really been beneficial?
One of the things we try to do is just have really interesting and challenging speakers that people haven't heard from before. So I want them to walk away saying, wow, that was wild. I never heard anything like that. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about the content personally. These are people who go to a lot of events and hear a lot of speakers. So their bar is pretty high. And if you deliver something to them that they've never heard before, they're 100% likely to sign up again the next year.
David, as we close out, it sounds like the industry is changing, the association business is changing. Are there new skills or new positions that you've added to CBA to help you adjust to some of these new trends?
I think the key thing is on the communications front. I have great professionals in our communications team, and I put a lot of emphasis on being great at that. I also think the style of communications has to have changed in the sense that people have a long history of making these very carefully rounded off and smoothed out press releases that are almost designed to be not read or not,
not offend.
Yeah. And really what you need to do in this environment is really punch through with something that sounds, because it is authentic. And I think a lot of executives have a problem with that because there's risk tied to that, right? The only way you're going to be heard is to really punch through and sound like you're saying something. So we put a lot of emphasis on having best-in-class communications, and I think we do. And my folks in that score are top-notch.
Well, I encourage listeners to visit the consumerbrands.association.org website because there's some really bold and powerful language about the work that you're doing and about the industry.
Thank you.
David, I want to thank you for sharing so much of your journey and the things that CBA is doing to thrive, and thriving you are. I hope you'll come back in the future and tell us about the awesome things that you're doing this, next time around.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thank you for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!